Fairey Albacore. Okay, so this might seem, at first glance, a rather strange one to start off with. Why start off with the Fairey Albacore? Why have it as aircraft free in a series? Well, if you consider the first aircraft I did, the first aircraft I considered and did for these videos, well, that was the Blackburn. And that's a interesting aircraft, but ultimately turns out to be not pursued because the trouble is fitting its unique capabilities and fit into the structure of the Navy going forward. It's a capability which fits at the flight level to provision to the fleet. It's a capability which is more difficult to justify as a squadron level commitment, in which case it's going to be added on to the capabilities of the aircraft otherwise available, and doesn't really work. It does eventually come back, but if we consider today, it's again a flight level. AWACS, Airborne Early Warning, is a flight level thing. And then, well, I did the Sopwith Cuckoo. A really, really cool aircraft. And the real answer to what a World War I torpedo bomber looked like. But, while I've been ill, this book was sitting across from me. W. Harrison's Fairey Swordfish and Albacore. And it got me to thinking about my specification book, which is just actually around there. And got me to think about the fact that the specifications that produce the Albacore all come about in 1936. They all come about in 1936. What happened in 1936? Well, think about it. I regularly tell people that 1932 is officially when the 10-year rule ends. 1937 is actually when the brakes are taken off and the investment's allowed to go ahead and the funding starts blowing up. So instead of thinking about the Royal Navy having 7 years to prepare for World War II when it breaks out, with an idea that it was going to happen 3 years later, I think I'm having 5 years to prepare, having sort of 5 years to think about preparing, but not being able to do much more than it, and then 2 years to actually prepare. You start to realise why the Royal Navy thinks, hang on, we're planning to do a great leap forward in technology. What's the great leap forward? Well, their next aircraft, which will become the Barracuda, they're supposed to succeed Swordfish, is supposed to be able to achieve the same reliability as the Swordfish in terms of operation. It's supposed to achieve greater range, greater carriage of weaponry, and the same reliability of delivery as the Swordfish achieves. Remember, the Swordfish has a brilliant system. It has the whole tension wire and all these things designed to deliver torpedoes into a harbour. And the thing is, the Barracuda, because of all this, requires quite a lot of high-tech equipment. Things which air ministries are going to be competing over. And the Royal Navy remembers its previous experience. And they also have a fear, what happens if war breaks out sooner? Because they've been gambling on having more time. As it is, they're looking at it going, well, we're going to need to keep the Swordfish in service for at least another couple of years. We don't know when the Barracuda's likely to come in service. We hope it's going to be prior to 1942. But that means that the Swordfish, which has been upgraded but not really modernised, and let's be honest, it's only entered service in 1933, so it's not that old, but in aircraft revolutionary terms at this period, that's still getting up there in terms of service life. 3 years is still... They reckon they need a backup. They can't afford to place all their eggs in one basket. And the thing is, they don't have the budget restrictions that mean they have to. They do not have the budget restrictions which mean they have to. They have enough of financial capabilities, they have enough awareness, they can afford to do more. And this is where the albacore comes in. For the albacore, rather than thinking of it as the replacement for the swordfish, which it was to an extent, think of it more as the interim that's supposed to provide almost a modern take on a swordfish, or a modernized swordfish, to provide cover until the barracuda is available. Think of it as a navy hoping war doesn't come till after 1942. That's what's been told to plan on. A navy going, the swordfish works, the swordfish will do what we want it to do at long range, night to strike, etc. But we know what next generation's aircraft are coming. We've got a plan. But if that aircraft is delayed, we could find ourselves in serious trouble. So let's go have also something else in the production works that we can call upon. Also helps in terms of providing something which allows the Navy to funnel some funds to Fairey to increase and enhance their infrastructure and their manufacture capabilities due to what's coming up. All those are factors and decisions going on. Okay, this is one of the things you have to consider when you're looking at the aircraft being ordered sometimes in the 1930s. Sometimes look at them and go, what is the point of that? It's useless. And I think about it, go, well, hang on, it's going to require engines. These aircraft will require engines. They require part manufacture. They require factory space. They require people to have experience and develop their skills building aircraft. Oh my, it's a learning tool. It's a way of paying for infrastructure to be increased, which gets it past the Treasury. It's an allowed support. Now, this is the point at which normally I would be expected to probably start being rude about the albacore. And the albacore really does have a lot of problems. It does. The fundamental one is that the Taurus ain't sound. There is a great song about this. And I'm going to apologise now, because I'm going to attempt to sing this with a blocked nose and the occasional coughing going on. Hopefully it won't be too bad. My stringbag flies over the ocean, my stringbag flies over the sea. If it weren't for King George's swordfish, where would the Royal Navy be? Stringbag, stringbag, oh bring back my stringbag to me, to me. Stringbag, stringbag, oh bring back my stringbag to me. At Toronto and chase of the Bismarck, in the battle of Cape Matapan, 'twas the fish from the swordfish that fixed them, and those who could run how they ran. Oh, stringbag, stringbag, oh bring back my stringbag to me. Stringbag, stringbag, oh bring back my stringbag to me. Now the science of dropping torpedoes is taught in an RNS Crail, where the instructors so good that pupils with a swordfish are unlikely to fail. Oh stringbag, stringbag, oh bring back my stringbag to me. Stringbag, stringbag, oh bring back my stringbag to me. No doubt when we get back to barracudas, the swordfish's day will be done. So remember 'twas this kite that fixed them, and gave them a place in the sun. And it has a lovely extra stanza, which is often added in. The stringbag relies on her Peggy, the modified Taurus ain't sound, so the swordfish flies off on her mission, the albacore stays on the ground. Now, the problem is there are lots of discussions about whether or not the engine was not as reliable as the Pegasus. The point is, it got the reputation as being not as reliable as the Pegasus, despite the fact that actually the Pegasus and the Taurus is the better engine once its issues are worked out. But the Albacore is a far heavier aircraft than the Swordfish, and the engine. The Taurus is modified, and when it first comes into service, it has issues. And that is the sort of thing which can quickly leave a legacy. When you've got a very reliable aircraft, when you've had a legacy of very reliable aircraft prior to the Swordfish coming in, because as I said in the Cuckoo video, and about the Sopwith Cuckoo, it's been an evolution, not a revolution. The Royal Navy, every generation is built upon the previous generation in terms of its aircraft, in terms of its torpedo bombers. Everyone's become more reliable, built on their own. It's not so much developing individual aircraft as being an ongoing development program that has existed for since 1916. You can really go back to in sort of some of the ideas. And so that's what the Swordfish benefits from when it's in service in 1930. Comes into service in the 1930s. It's basically building on a 20-year development run. By the time you're dealing with it in 1940, there's a nearly 30-year development run going on. There is a difference, therefore, you're dealing with. The Taurus, it's a better engine, but it's not as reliable at the beginning because of the modifications. And one of the things this video will seek to do is get into that. The nature of the reliability, but also the reasons why that caught on as a fixture in our summations of the Albacore, more than perhaps the Albacore itself and its service record deserved. And it does have quite a decent service record. It does. Oh. Shameless book plug. Yay! That was a rather long introduction, I do realise, with the opening slide, but there are a lot of things which need to be discussed, and I've tried to get out of the habit of having the slides on a fixed timing, because that does remind me to move forward, which does tend to keep me to time better. I'm trying to keep these, to 40 minutes or less. You can look at the videos and see how well I'm doing in the Key Aircraft series, let alone the Key Ship series on that one. But, yeah. We're working on it. But no, shameless book plug. And, well, aren't my babies pretty? I am working on a 60-second advert video for this. I keep coming up with various ideas for shorts, but yeah, aren't they pretty? They are. They're non-identical. Yes, they're twins, but non-identical. Okay, so it's okay. It's okay. Each one's perfect in its own way, and I love both equally. Although I have to admit, one did feel a lot harder coming out than the other, mainly because one was months and months of editing, and one was, these are the issues we found in it after actually readers have read it, and we want to fix. And HMS Nubian had disappeared, but they're both mine. They're both special. And that's enough, whatever. So the Fairey Albacore. Now here's the interesting thing. What's the originating specification for the Fairey Albacore? Now at this point, people tend to turn around and go, well, of course, it's the specification S41/36. True. That's a good one. But that itself relates to M736 and S936. Okay. And there is an ongoing specification program for pretty much the development of three-seat torpedo spotter reconnaissance aircraft that the Royal Navy has been persuading the Air Ministry to put out almost every single year. They keep putting them out. They keep doing their best to put them out. You'll notice that both M7 and S9 are technically listed as cancelled. They are. Because what happens with specifications is sometimes they get back an aircraft, a design, they like it, but it doesn't quite fit the specifications they required, or their specifications, they feel they need to change them. So they produce a modified specification. And so that's what you have. You have M7, S9, and then S41. And all this comes through in 1936. Now, remember what I said about funding actually coming loose in 1937? Well, they were given a heads up that it was going to be coming. But the thing is, you have to start procurement long before you can get, long before you actually get to the paying for it. You can't order off a blank canvas. You need something there to order from, and so that's what they started. So if we consider this, it starts all off in 1936. The first flight is December 1938. That's introduced into service in 1940. Now, again, the first specification we tend to attach directly to the Barracuda project is the S-24-37. Probably looking at me going, but Alex, that's the year after it, and you said earlier this was being procured as interim. Well, let's be honest, they're looking for a monoplane torpedo bomber that's probably going to be a cantilevered aircraft that can also do dive bombing and various other requirements. In the nicest way, the Royal Navy has been working on the ideas behind the Barracuda for about 2 years, in conjunction with people who occasionally help them across in the various forms of the Fleet Air Arm and sometimes industry. Sometimes in the face of Air Ministry opposition, sometimes with some Air Ministry support, depending on who's who in which position. In fact, you could argue, you could almost put the whole idea for the Barracuda and what would eventually become the Barracuda, you could almost put it back to 1934, let alone 1935. And so they have a real idea of what they're doing. Barracuda first flies in December 1940. It's introduced into service in 1943. Roughly 3 years development, 3 years from first flight to introduction. Fairey Albacore, as we talked about. Ordered 36, first flight 38, introduced 40. So roughly 2 years. And the whole reason it was supposed to be quicker and easier to get into service, to provide that crucial coverage. They felt this would be sort of providing service 40 to 45. With the Barracuda expected to be coming in 42, 43-ish time. The whole sort of reason you have it is because as it's off the shelf, and supposedly is off the shelf, and off the shelf improved swordfish, it will be easier and quicker to develop. Now, I do have a personal feeling as to why the lingering distaste over the initial unreliability of Taurus engine happened. And my theory is it comes back to the fact that whilst the swordfish is an absolute pleasure to fly, the Albacore, of course, comes from Fairey, the same company. It's a biplane. It's supposed to be an improved swordfish in so many ways. You expect, therefore, as a pilot, mentally, when you get into it, it's going to be just as easy, if not easier, to fly. And the reality is it proved very heavy, especially in certain key areas. In key areas, this came up even in testing and during introduction. They were going on it and there's going, this is proving a problem. And that problem was, we drop the torpedo and then we want to maneuver after we drop the torpedo. Now, with a swordfish, you can do some really hair-brained maneuvers in a swordfish after you drop the torpedo. I mean, there are aircraft you do not think are gymnastic. That really, you would not think of being gymnastic. But a swordfish, especially one being flown by a Fleet Air Arm pilot in the late 1930s and during World War II. After it's dropped a torpedo, it turns into a pirouetting, flying trapeze artist in its manoeuvring. It'll be spinning all over the place to get away from the AA. Just ask the German AA gunners on the Bismarck, going, "What the frigate? What happened? How did they do that? That. No! That's part of their key to success. The Albacore, on the other side, is quite heavy. Yes, it can maneuver, you can pull it away, but it's not what they were expecting. And that, I think, is the big problem. You see, I think in many ways, the best place would have actually been to go with an Naval Swordfish. To have literally taken the Swordfish and put the improved Taurus and worked on the engine so it didn't have the reliability issues in the Swordfish, and give it a cockpit like you do on some later versions of the Swordfish, and basically just do an improved Swordfish. But they didn't. They knew better. And all those years of evolution rather than revolution, all those years of development which have gone in making the Swordfish what it is, okay? It's, as I've said, a very high-tech from the point of view of its weapon deployment system aircraft, but also a very reliable, very easy-to-fly aircraft, which makes it excellent for night operations. All that development, from the Sopwith Cuckoo onwards, to the Swordfish, is sort of put to one side. And yeah, this is what happens. It doesn't make it a bad aircraft, though. Please note, it's not. I'm not saying it's a bad aircraft, but I am saying it's a. Well, someone had a lot of bright ideas. Now, as I have kept saying TSR, Torpedo Spotter Reconnaissance. Technically, the Albacore is a torpedo bomber reconnaissance, but it can also do the spotting mission. So, it was also a TSR. There's a debate over that as well, when some people go, well, TBR is different from a TSR, and you go, can it do the spotting mission? Was it designed to be able to do the spotting mission? Yes. Was it actually arguably better at the spotting mission because it could have space for a map inside cover, which you haven't had since the Blackburn? Yes. Well then. It's an all-metal aircraft, which makes it a lot heavier, and actually slightly more difficult to repair. Also more likely to activate all those cannon rounds when they're hitting you. Whereas the fabric of the Swordfish, they tend to go straight through. Originally, they were going to have a powered rear turret. The idea was it would also have comprehensive facilities for observation navigation, and incorporating soundproofing and heating measures. Everything to make everything better. Now, the thing is, I'm sure this was all of benefit, especially to things like a toilet being added on. They had lots of amenities. What's interesting to note, and I think could have been really a different path, is they did test both monoplane and biplane variants in the wind tunnel. Sorry. I will apologise again. I'm actually going to see a doctor today because the cold and the cough have lingered on for so long. It just seems sensible. But yeah, it's causing weird things, and the speaking pronouncements is not any more fun. But no, the wind tunnel tests which they did extensively at RAA Farnborough, actually. November 1936 to June 1937 was spent with extensive wind tunnel tests. They guided the fitting of the flaps on the wings, and interesting enough, the monoplane was dismissed because two main worries. Some people raise to say they like to put it in historical speak, and they go, there were uncertainties for the row, or something like that. The monoplane actually had some good points of it, but what are they worried about with the monoplane? And I think the monoplane actually might have worked out better because they've gone with the metal construction, they've gone with the semi-monocoque design, etc., the split undercarriage, all these things. I think a monoplane would have worked with that a lot better. But the size of the wing, working out how to stow it properly, and sorting it all out, and having it being able to carry a torpedo at the right height and the right speed, stably enough to deploy the torpedo, we're all worried about. In the wind tunnel, it was felt it could work in practice, but it all looked a bit theoretical, and it all looked like a very narrow practice. And again, you have to remember the Royal Navy's always thinking about night operations. They're always thinking about fighting outnumbered and using their offset advantage. So they want to make everything as easy on the crew as possible. And there is a big perception in the Royal Navy, and big perception in the Air Ministry at the time, and to be fair, in quite a lot of the designers at the time, with some justification, that at a technological level you're talking about at that point, the biplane is the better option for deploying torpedoes, under the conditions the British are worrying about. If you're throwing in the extra complications of night operations and long-range strikes at night, the biplane makes things that much easier. It does. Now, please note, I've been kind of specific about the types of engines I've put in here, and I'm using the ones which were fitted to the equivalent variants of their aircraft. Okay, why am I saying that? Because believe it or not, there are some Pegasus engines which come out later in World War II which have a lot more horsepower. And there are some Taurus ones which grow. And let's be honest, they start off with the Taurus 2, which has 1,065 horsepower, and by the time they've really fixed it and got it really working, and please note I'm saying really working, they fit them with the Taurus 12, which has 1,130 horsepower. I do love... Okay, I'd like to point this out. This appears in more places than I'd like to think, and you will find several websites which list it. But I've also found the book which first said it, where they basically go on and on and on about how the Taurus 12 was much more powerful than the Taurus 2. And I was sitting there thinking, okay, it must be different. I must have got it wrong, because I thought it was only 1,100 horsepower. I thought it was pretty much a 1050 being replaced by 1,100. I didn't think it was that much, but obviously I'm wrong. And then reading through the sources, it's 65 horsepower. It's 65 horsepower on something which is over 1,000 horsepower. It's 65. Okay? That's not a lot. You've gained 65 horsepower. That's cute. That's probably the number of horses my first car had. Because that was an L-Reg Vauxhall Astra Merit 1.4 litre estate, which had 97 brake horsepower brand new. By the time I got it, I'm reckoning it probably had 65 brake horsepower. And I loved that little car. It was brilliant. The insurance was amazing. It was a lovely, solid little car, but it had a 1.4 engine. You wouldn't make an estate like that these days. It was grossly underpowered for its size. But it was great for me. Went everywhere, reliable as anything. I had a disturbing habit of beating BMWs off the mark at traffic lights. All sorts of fun things. But still. Not exactly a lot of power. I wouldn't describe it as a very powerful car. And I wouldn't describe changing from a Taurus 2 to a Taurus 12 with a 65 horsepower increase in the engine as a game changer. I mean, when I read that in one book, I went, you have got to be kidding me. Because I'd read all that and they hadn't given the figures. And when I found the figures, I went back and read it and went, I'm not going to name names on the author here, but I'm going to presume that they either flirted with being a house salesperson at some point in their previous life, in their life, or a used car salesperson, or alternatively they had been enjoying some particularly good recreational chemicals, because that is the only world I can think of where 65 horsepower sounds like a massive change. But no, the big problem is if you look at this is a double radial, and that's a single radial. And that's the level of complication you've got. You've basically, you've not just got one of those, you've got two of those, and they're interacting with each other. You know, you're massively increasing the potential of complication and problems. And that's the reason why the Taurus, when it first comes into service, is unreliable. Not because it's something new, not because it's something... This is the Taurus engine is usually what people want to when they go... I want to keep telling them, oh, well, the Albacore is the off-the-shelf option to give them cover until the Barracuda comes in. That's what it was designed as. And people go, but the problems with the Taurus, it was a new developed engine. Not really, but because basically what they're taking is pretty much the business section of the Pegasus and timesing it by 2 and pushing it together. I know that's not exactly what they're doing before anyone starts coming with it, but I'd say if I do a year of engines at some point, and I would love to do that, but I would love to do that in the way I used to do that at university. And as I doubt I'll be allowed back to the university I used to do the engine testing in, I'm going to have to find another space where they will allow me to muck around with their aero and other engines and show exactly what happens when you put the different fuel mixtures in. And if you get the fuel mixture just right, you can make all the caps of the valves go ping, 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 ping. It's brilliant fun. Please, no one below write the idea of the appropriate fuel mixture for how to get that to happen on certain Rolls-Royce engines, but I will recommend there are some very good Rolls-Royce engines for doing that. The Rolls-Royce Kestrel was especially a good engine for doing that. A beautiful engine for making it go ping. So, the specs. Now, I had fun doing the slide. I will admit I did have fun doing the slide. 2 in torpedo bomber role, 3 in reconnaissance mission role. As a land plane, 40 foot, 1 1/8 inches long, which in tail up rigging position. As a seaplane, 41 foot, 7 and 1/8 inches long. It's because of the floats. They make it stick out. They stick out forward. Okay, that's it. It's the float sticking out. Wingspan, width, stay the same. Doesn't matter if they have floats or not. But the height changes quite dramatically if they have floats, because if they in their land plane form, which is what we consider their carrier form, they are 12 foot, 10.5 inches high. That's with the tail down and the propeller tip down. In seaplane form, they're 16 foot, 8 1/4 inches high. in a tail-up rigging position. Good. Bygone. They have lots of fun different weights here, but the really interesting thing is when you start looking at their weight. Because if we consider the empty weight for a torpedo bomber was 7,250 pounds. The reconnaissance mission empty weight was 7,200 pounds. The gross weight, torpedo bomber, 10,460 pounds. The gross weight for a swordfish was 7,580 pounds. So, as I said, roughly 3.4 tons for a swordfish. In bomber form, their maximum in bomber form, and well, their maximum, and that's the maximum sort of takeoff weight actually for the swordfish, really. So the equivalent maximum takeoff weight for the albacore is 5.8 tons, but in gross weight in terms of their torpedo bomber form, it's 4.7, nearly 4.75 tons. It's a big difference. And the thing is, you're talking about a weight differential which has, well, gone up by 50%, if we're being honest. Roughly, let's say at least 50%. Maybe, if we're being generous, a third. A third is what I'll settle for. It's gone up by a third. And whilst the power has gone, power from the engine has gone up by far more than a third, it's not 820 horsepower. No, 920 horsepower. It is 1,065. That's not that much of an increase. And structurally, this is also going to be a bigger aircraft to get through the air. It's going to take up more space. Again, length, 40 foot, 1.8 inches. That's a Lampane version. The swordfish lengths, 35 foot, 8 inches. That's the difference. Wingspan, 50 foot. Wingspan for the swordfish, 45 foot. Height for the swordfish, 12 foot 4 inches in land plane configuration. For the Albacore, 12 foot 10.5 inches. In every single way, this is a bigger, heavier aircraft. And its range for a torpedo, 710 miles. Versus the range of the swordfish, 522 miles. Again, it's carrying more. Its service ceiling, 18,000 feet. It is a much better aircraft on paper. But the trouble is, it's a very different aircraft than the swordfish. This is its problem. It's... how do I put this politely? How do I put this in a way that makes it is fair to the Albacore? If you've ever been go-karting, there are some really nice middle in the middle of the pack go-karts, which are almost a perfect balance of horsepower and lightness. They're just brilliant. Driving them is like driving on air. You can hit the apex on every corner with minimal work. You can literally waft around the track at what feels like breakneck speeds. You can dip in and out of everyone. And anyway, others have gone for the bigger, more powerful ones. And they're faster, yeah, but they don't feel like driving the same thing. You can win the race in those bigger, more powerful ones. You really can. But it's not the same experience. One's like driving heaven. And one is driving power. That's the difference. That's where the Albacore suffers. And if you consider that all the pilots pretty much had flown the Swordfish, they all know what that driving, that flying nirvana feels like, what that wonderful aircraft to fly feels like. Then they're in this. And yeah, it's the better aircraft on stats, but it doesn't feel like the better aircraft. It feels clunky. And then, of course, there's the fact they're always being promised the Barracuda. The Barracuda's coming. The Barracuda's coming. So this is always seen as that interim. It's seen as, it's not the successor of the Swordfish, it's the interim until we get the successor of the Swordfish. And it's not as pleasant to fly as the Swordfish. So even as good as it is, as nice it is, it has the toilet, for goodness sake. And as a rule, its aircrew are not sitting waist deep in fuel. It's a great thing. And yet, you ask the crew and they'll go, yeah, but the Swordfish. I'm still searching for that sort of perfect universal explanation to give people. Can't really think of one. Can't really think of one. Oh well. So, to the service. Now, service-wise, they are interesting. They first get into service with 826 Naval Air Squadron in March 1940. And they're covering the English Channel. But they're doing it from shore bases and providing protection to convoys going through that channel, 1940. Then eventually, 826, along with 829, the pretty much second Albacore squadron, goes up to HMS Formidable. Now, there is also 827, and if I'm not mistaken, 828, which end up doing some things, and they get on to Victorious quite soon. But at this point, it's Formidable is the first one to operate them from a carrier, and it's 826 and 829. She has them, and it's November 1940. Now, this is where they first start to pick up that experience of trouble. Because if we consider, in November 1940, Formidable is at sea, working up with various sections of the home fleet, and eventually, she, along with Dorsetshire and Norfolk, two, of course, Cannon-class cruisers, will sail to protect convoys and search for the Admiral Scheer, which was out doing a surface raiding operation. And had, at that point, recently attacked convoy HX-84 in the North Atlantic. Sadly, they failed to find her, and they escorted a convoy all the way down to Cape Town. Were there on the 22nd of January 1941, and that was why Formidable was the carrier chosen when it was felt that Illustrious had been damaged. Illustrious, of course, had been damaged, and so Formidable goes up the coast. And as she goes up the coast, they actually do some interesting things. They attack Italian forces in Somalia and Eritrea. They also attack a steamer, Moncaglieri, for loss of 2 Albacores. More importantly, they keep having issues with the Albacore engines. Now, what they basically find the root cause of this is a debated terminology. I have read some very good recent books which have put it down to very, very intricate and ultimately experience engineering. You learn by doing. However, I also remember having a long conversation with a fitter. This was about, 20 odd years ago. I think I was about 15, 14 at the time. And this fitter from the Fleet Air Arm days, in World War II, served with them in World War II, was a friend of my grandfather. To be quite precise, he was his next door neighbour. And he'd worked on swordfish, and he worked on albacores. He worked on pretty much. He managed to stay working with aircraft. His first aircraft he'd worked on was a Fairey Flycatcher, and his last aircraft he worked on with the Royal Navy was a Sea Vixen. So he managed to stay with them for nearly 30-something years. He was a fitter, NCO. And the thing he said was the problem with the engines was that they found, and he was on Formidable at this time. At least that's what I remember him just talking about it. So I think he was either on Formidable, that's how I remember it, or probably knew people, or at least would have known a lot of people who were aboard her at the time. That the issue came down to one of oiling. When you're dealing with an engine which is being exposed to salt water, you need to take even more effort to make sure it's correctly lubricated and protected from that salt water, because that corrosion can cause, under the pressures that the engine goes through, in many, many places. And the more complicated radial, double radial, that was the Taurus versus the Pegasus, made this an even more complicated task of getting used to where all the lubricant needed to go, where all the fuel, oil needed to go, and where you needed to make sure it had gone. And that was a problem. They needed to completely rewrite the manual. I remember him talking about bathing the engines. Getting the engines off and bathing them, because that was the only way they were sure they had got it everywhere it needed to go. And that's actually not a good thing to do, because if you bathe an engine, you don't have to clear it out again to get the fuel through and stop the fuel being contaminated. Oh, it's all sorts of fun, but you do what you have to do and you get the engines working. And this is why it's these aircraft which are there for the Battle of Cape Matapan. Interesting enough, 829 is flying a mixture of albacore and swordfish once they get to Mediterranean. Because there aren't spare albacores around, there are spare swordfish. One of the things you will see constantly turning up throughout World War II is spare swordfish. They never go away. And the moment you have them being around, being radar fitted, etc., and as capable as they are, they're just so easy to fly. It's a town class cruiser from World War One problem. It's a case of the Royal Navy's going, we have some swordfish there? Yeah, we have some airframes just sitting there. Boxed or unboxed? Does it matter? No, it really doesn't. How badly have they been stored? We'll clean them up and they'll be working in about 4 hours. Okay, carry on. It's just... There are even times at which they're not quite sure which airframes they've got. They do a service inspection of them, and they use the numbers they have on them, and they're sort of going, what's this airframe supposed to be out here in the first place? I don't know. Matapan, of course, is one of the famous actions they get into. The Battle of Cape Matapan is one where the albacores really are useful. A strike force of 6 albacores, loaded with torpedoes, attacked the Vittorio Veneto. Ju-88s tried to intervene, but they're driven off by the escorting pair of Fulmars. This attack was unsuccessful, but then a further strike of 3 albacores and 2 swordfish is sent. While they're flying off, and have flown off, there are a pair of Italian SM-79s, the Savio Marchetti. They're beautiful, gorgeous torpedo bombers. Those tri-entrance torpedo bombers. I'll be talking about those in this series at some point. Not probably in Key Aircraft 1, but in one of the key aircrafts I will be talking about them because they're gorgeous looking aircraft. Launch an attack on Formidable. They fail. At 14:50 hours, that's nearly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, one of the albacores succeeds in hitting the Vittorio Veneto. All the other aircraft missed. They then launched a third strike of 6 albacores and 2 swordfish at 17:30 hours, but they find the Poala instead of the battleship, the Vittorio Veneto, and it's likely it's actually one of 815 swordfish that were flying from Milan in Crete that had linked up with the aircraft coming into attack from Formidable that actually hit the Pola. I'd say that's today's question, though. What happens if they get the second hit on the Vittorio Veneto? Cape Matapan probably happens, but Veneto might well be the stricken one, circled by cruisers and destroyers as the British fleet gets closer and closer. That could have an impact on World War II. That could have a big impact on World War II. They had an interesting service life. At various points they get involved in all sorts of random operations. One of the things that the operations that I really find interesting is Operation EF. Otherwise, it takes place in 1941. It's otherwise known as the raid on Kirkenes and Petsamo. And basically the idea was this: to give Stalin something positive to point to. The Germans launching Operation Barbarossa. The Royal Navy. Jack Tovey was not happy with this, by the way. The commander of the Home Fleet basically was forced to do this by the War Cabinet and the Admiralty, i.e. Churchill. It was forced to send Victorious and Furious to go and launch a strike that would hit the Norwegian port of Kirkenes and the North Finnish port of... Okay, it's in Petsamo. Can I just go... No, you won't. You'll make me want to say it. You want me to say it. You're cruel, you know that? You make me... I've got a blocked nose. I have got a weird throat. I've got a headache from coughing all night long. And you're making me say this word. This is not kind. Okay? It's not kind. Linakamaari. It's the only time I'm saying it. They were actually spotted by German aircraft. The strikes were actually flown over. German aircraft flew over the strikes and went, "There are British down there! Do we go down to fight them down there? There are British down there! Do we go down to fight them? No! Are they landing or flying? That's... There are British down there! Yes. Here, pilot. There are British down there. Are we going down to fight them? There are British down there. They're below me. Okay. Now, the Kirkenes forces therefore is intercepted by German fighters, And they do manage to still sink one ship and set another on fire. However, 11 Albacores and 2 Fulmar fighters are shot down for loss of 2 Luftwaffe aircraft. And why is that? Because the moment that surprise is lost, that's not really a good scenario. There are a lot more German aircraft to come and attack you, and the Fulmars are not being able to do supported by their usual start tricks, which allow them to do all the things they like to do. Fulmars are very good when they've got radar direction. They're a long way from radar direction. They have problems. The force attacking the Finnish town faced rather less opposition. They did lose a Fulmar to sorry. They lost an aircraft due to engine failure. But that wasn't the end, sadly enough. Another Fulmar and Albacore were shot down during the attack. Only minor damage was caused to the shipyard and oil storage tanks. And well, the results were, from the British side, 16 aircraft lost, 25 personnel captured, 13 killed. The German and Finnish side, 1 cargo ship sunk, 1 cargo ship damaged, 1 small steamer sunk, 2 aircraft shot down, and several jetties destroyed. I'd say unqualified disaster is only the beginning of the phraseologies I'd use for it, but I wouldn't again use this as something to bash the Albacore. It was something which quite a lot of people were against, and I'm fairly certain would never have happened under certain leaderships. It just wouldn't have. Now, eventually, there are 15 Fleet Air Arm squadrons equipped with the Albacore. They mainly operate in the Mediterranean, but also, of course, in the Far East. There are also aircraft operating from HMS Victorious, which go and attack Tirpitz. 817 and 832 squadrons have a go at that. They try and do a Taranto on Tirpitz. Sadly, they lose 2 aircraft doing it and don't manage to succeed in doing it, but they give it a go. And believe it or not, there is a fairly strong chance that the Japanese made use of some of the surviving aircraft which they found in Singapore. But as it was, the squadrons that operate it, the Albacore, were number 415 Squadron, Royal Canadian Air Force, number 36 and number 119 Squadron, Royal Air Force, in the UK. Fleet Air Arm. Well, there's 700, 733, 747, 750, 753, 754, 756, 763, 766, 767, 768, 769, 771, 774, 775, 778, 781, 782, 783, 785, 786, 787, 788, 789, 791, 793, 796, 797, 799, and now we're into 800s. The 800s, of course, are usually, well, how do I put this politely? The 700 squadrons are catapult flights at various points, and they are the organisation which sort of is there to provide aircraft for things like cruisers, for escort carriers, those sort of duties. They often sort of seem to provide them. Occasionally they did other duties, including test aircraft and, just being there to support the naval operations. The 800s are usually the actual operational units. And then that's 810, 815, 817, 818, 820, 821, 822, 823, 826, 827, 828, 829, 830, 831, 832, and 841. They're good squadrons. And they are good aircraft. The Albacore is, yeah, it's more of a disappointment, really. And I would say it's a disappointment because it's supposed to be better than the Swordfish in every way. And whilst on paper it is, in very real cases, because of its initial issues with reliability, because of its initial issues in terms of flyability, which wasn't an initial issue, it carried on having those issues compared to the Swordfish, it always suffered in comparison. And it never had its moment in the sun. The Swordfish had Taranto. The Swordfish had Bismarck. They didn't get Vittorio Veneto. If they got it, and here's the second part of the question, if they have got the Vittorio Veneto, does that change our perception of the Albacore in historical terms? Or do we still treat it like we do today? I would say it's also, to me, always interesting that there are 800 Albacores built. There are nearly 2,400 Swordfish built. The Albacores, well, they are mostly built by Fairey's Hayes factory. Built by Fairey themselves. In contrast, Fairey only produce 692, just under 700, of the Swordfish. The remaining of the Swordfish are produced by Blackburn. And that's where another interesting thing comes in. Because there's often a debate as to which were the better made, the Fairey or the Blackburn Swordfish. And which were the better to fly. It was felt by many pilots, and I will say this, that of the Swordfish, the better ones to fly were the Blackburn ones. And if we consider Blackburn provide roughly, well, more than 2/3 of the Swordfish built, it could again be that Albacore, the Fairey Albacore, suffers because of its manufacturer being its own designing company, which seemed to have not been as good at construction as necessarily Blackburn were. It's worth a think about. Good aircraft. Good aircraft. And frankly, what I'm looking for this series to do, I know I don't answer all the questions, I know I don't give you everything in these key ships and key aircraft series, and I won't in the key commander series, because I see them as base points, as starting points, as things which allow you to go and look in elsewhere. I put in today one operation which is well known, Matapan, discussed, and one operation which is not well known. And let's be honest, an operation which is called Operation EF 1941 is not going to be a well known operation. It's an intriguing one, but it's not a well known operation. It's a multi-carrier operation taking place in June 1941. Well, actually July 1941. As a response to the invasion of Barbarossa, the Operation Barbarossa invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941. What were the carriers doing? They were being sent to attack targets in northern Norway and in Finland to try and interdict the supply routes. But yes, this is a starting point for discussion, and hopefully you enjoy it. And what have we got coming up? Well, the year of technology will hopefully finish strong. He says, hopefully. Hopefully I get some medicine today, and hopefully that helps me deliver on these lives. And the lives are going to be Patron 90, our warship autoloader turrets prototyped. Patron 91, Flower class loops, the most key ship of the 20th century. And page 92, Frank Whittle is given consistent funding by Britain to develop jet engines from 1928. Now, I hope against hope, that I will get some medication that will help me. Because the trouble is, for me, at about 6 o'clock every evening, I go from coughing every 10 to 15 minutes, which I do seem to be okay at for most of the afternoon if I've, judged myself properly, to coughing non-stop, and I don't really stop coughing non-stop till the next morning, which is not really fun for me and wouldn't be fun for you to watch, especially as it turns into a snotty cough. It's terrible. Anyway, thank you very much everyone for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you everyone for your support, your kind words, both when Mum was in hospital last week. She's had tests and checks today and she's getting better. She's very keen on moving down to Cornwall though. Incredibly keen on moving down to Cornwall, because apparently she was told by the consultant here that his friend in Cornwall does all the things through virtual wards down in Cornwall. They do it in your home. They set it up and monitor your stuff as it with you at your home, rather than make you come and stay in hospital. And she loves that idea. So yeah, that one's really going ahead. We're currently in talks over a couple of properties. We've sort of got discussions going on over them, so we'll see. We've got the property we were already bidding on, and they're still playing hard to get. And we've got another property's come up which we were interested in, which had gone off the market because apparently been sold, but now that might have fallen through. In which case, we might be able to get in there. In which case, the property which has been banking on, we've been the only ones interested in, and they've kept turning down our offers, might be about to get very disappointed. We'll see what happens. So yeah, it's all good. Thank you very much. None of this would be possible without you. None of this would be possible without you. Just wouldn't. Thank you.